Controlling basically means striving, but more than this, it means striving within the context of a positive paradigm, which is to say, striving within the context of a totally known situation, a situation in which we know that where we are at the moment is definitely wrong, and where we know that where we're trying to go is definitely right. So controlling can't take place without right and wrong. And right and wrong doesn't exist without our minds projecting it. After all, we can't really imagine that right and wrong exists in the world around us. Right and wrong is the most human thing there is. It's got nothing to do with nature. Nature has no truck with right and wrong. But we do. We're all about right and wrong. We're obsessed with it. We feel absurdly good when we manage to get it right, and we feel ridiculously down when we can't. And yet, right and wrong are only categories projected by the thinking mind. So we'd have to ask, what is going on here? What the hell are we doing? What's the point of what we're doing? Seeing as there's no actual point. Seeing as how it's all a ridiculous tautological game. Games are tautological because I say what the game is, or somebody says what the game is. But supposing I invent a game and I say what the game is, and then I take the game seriously, which I have to do to play it, and then carry on from that point as if the game were the actual reality, and responding in that particular way, looking at things in that particular way. Now, all this is happening within my own bubble. I'm the one who created that situation, and then I hand over my power to it and act as if this idea of mine, this projection of mine, actually has some sort of existence outside of my head, outside of my mind, which it doesn't. Because as we've said, there's no right and wrong outside of our ideas of what is right and what is wrong. Reality isn't a test in that way. It isn't a puzzle. It's not like a Rubik's Cube that we need to find the right answer to. It's absolutely beyond all of our ideas about what is right and what is wrong. Which is too big a picture for us to imagine that our wretched little ideas of this is good and this is bad are dwarfed totally by a reality that is utterly beyond good and bad, utterly beyond duality. It's too much for us. We can't handle that. We can't get our heads around it, even though there is always a chance that we can kind of see just how ridiculous we're being in conforming to this petty outlook. And a petty outlook is always getting upset by rules, by the imagined transgression of rules, and by the imagined correct obeying of rules. So when we're in this petty state of mind, we're constantly going up and down because everything is either right or wrong. Everything is. So this is the general state of mind that we find ourselves in. Every day brings along lots of things that are right and lots of things that are wrong, or sometimes mainly things that are wrong. Sometimes it can seem like all the things are wrong, but whenever I come across something that is not right, I'm seeing firsthand conclusive evidence of my petty-mindedness. Because who's saying it's not right apart from me? And why am I saying it? What motivates me in saying it? Generally, what motivates me in saying it is that whatever it is that I judge as being wrong or not acceptable is getting in the way of me playing the game that I'm habituated to playing. It gets in the way of me enacting my habits, in other words. And as conditioned creatures, that's all we want to do, is enact our habits without anything or anyone getting in our way. Our thoughts are habits. So anything that thought creates is a habit. A thought is a habit. It's not a new thing. It's not something we're discovering. It's an old thing. It's an old formula that's been fished up from the bottom of the bucket where we keep all these formulae. And it's like, oh yeah. So when we approach life on the basis of our thinking, we're approaching life on the basis of all these old ways of looking at things. There are no new thoughts. As Krishnamurti says, there are no new possibility. There's no possibility of seeing the world in a startlingly original way through thought, because thought is always old. Thought is based on its categories, and its categories are just the same old, dusty old categories. They belong in a museum. They come out of a museum. But there is great safety in this, of course. There's great safety in never being challenged by coming across something that isn't part of our repertoire or part of our map of things that we know can happen. So I have a certain list of things that can happen. Some of them I see as being good, some of them I see as being bad. But no matter which it is, when it happens, it's like, oh yeah, this is that one. Oh yeah, that is that one. It always maps some idea that I have, because if it didn't, I couldn't say that it was right or wrong. How the hell would I know? It would just be something. But as we can readily see, if we notice ourselves, it doesn't happen that something happens and we go, oh, here's something new, because the mind always judges straight away. It's got to be good or bad. And if it ever happens that something happens and we don't judge it straight away, that is an altered state of consciousness. It's not our everyday state of consciousness. Our everyday state of consciousness is judging 24/7. It's judging all the time. Every single thought is a judgment, as Eckhart Tolle says. Thoughts are judgments are thoughts. And we feel the need to, in this petty-minded, ridiculous way, pass our judgments on every single thing and then react correspondingly in accordance with our own judgments, which, when we put it like that, seems very, very laughable, of course. It's this private game. I'm playing a private game. Why the hell am I doing that? What's the point in it? It's not as if it feels good anyway. It's annoying. I'm constantly irritated, constantly controlling, constantly trying to get things to be the right way, and that can never happen because there's no such thing as a right way. There's just the way things are, the way things unfold, the way the cookie crumbles. But even though it's not any fun being petty-minded, being small-minded, whoever said it was fun being small-minded, we know it isn't. It just means the tiniest little thing is going to upset us and put us into a spin and put us into a bad form, because we're operating out of this state of mind where everything has to be according to the rules. Everything has to be according to how I think it should be. And that's never, 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 never going to happen. And it shouldn't happen anyway. Why should it happen? Why on earth should that happen? But because I'm convinced it should happen, I'm going to be continually frustrated, continually irritated. And even if I'm in a situation where I have power, because that's why we all want power, because power means supposedly I can get things to be the way that I want them to be, rather than just moaning about it. Even if I have power, things are still going to happen that I don't want to happen. Plus, I'm going to invest an awful lot of time in controlling, which is not fun, which doesn't feel good. It's not that we control because it's a worthwhile state in itself. We're controlling because we're very, very keen to get something as a result of our controlling. So somewhere there's this idea that if I do fulfill all of the little rules or agendas and I do get everything to happen right, then all of a sudden trumpets will sound, curtains will be pulled forward, and there'll be this marvelous state of being. Only, of course, that doesn't happen because when we're on that particular road that leads towards me shutting my mind down, or me making myself smaller and smaller, more and more small-minded, that particular road, it kind of is a road that goes down into the murky, dark depths. It's kind of like a road that actually snakes away in front of me into the dark and foggy depths until eventually it heads into the mouth of Hades, the entrance to the underworld. Where else would such a road go? And yet somehow I imagine that road is going to lead to it's going to open up, and by being small-minded, by being petty, if I'm petty enough, if I'm small-minded enough, I'll crack it, and the world will open up and become expansive and wonderful. And all of this will happen because I've been so good at controlling. And even though that sounds too stupid for anyone to take seriously, we all take it seriously, all of us, because we all think our controlling is going to open up all sorts of possibilities for us. Instead of saying that, non-stop controlling closes down our possibilities and leads us into ever-increasing states of pettiness. Pettiness upon pettiness every day is more petty than the last. So that's neurotic hell. Even before there was a word neurotic, we all knew about this particular state of mind. It's when we lose perspective so much that life just becomes unbearable because we're so damn petty. And we all know that's not a great way to be. But of course we can get sucked into it just the same. Because we get sucked into it, then we don't know we're petty because we're just seeing things are going wrong, or that shouldn't be right, or we shouldn't have done that, or they shouldn't have done this. That's all we see. We're all focused on the infringements of our little rules, and we don't see any focus on ourselves to see that isn't it strange that I'm insisting that all these ludicrous rules are there in the first place because they're not really there. So why do I insist that they're there? Why do I put life on hold until these stupid rules have all been fulfilled, which they never will, which is what we all do, which is the waiting game. So that's kind of a strange one. We all know that being incredibly petty-minded isn't going to usher in a meaningful life, a fulfilling life, a life with any peace in it or happiness or anything like that. We know that. And so we should also know, and that actually means that we do know on some level, that mental health is not about following rules. It's not about controlling. It's not about trying to get things to be the way that we think they should be and other people think or tell us they should be. Because all of that stuff is incredibly, incredibly petty, laughably petty. All of that stuff is an arbitrary projection of the thinking mind. Will we ever get happy or fulfilled? Will we ever experience peace or creativity as a result of worshipping the petty rational mind? And we know we won't. We absolutely won't, because what we're talking about here is torment. It's just torment. The thinking mind is torment. The thinking mind can never think its way into being non-petty, because being non-petty means not thinking, not judging, not subjecting everything to a kind of active scrutiny where we see it, whether it matches what we want or think should be the case or not. So the thinking mind is a very, very, very limited kind of a little thing. And it's good for those things that correspond to what it knows about and what it can do. But it's only good in this very limited respect, because if we try and apply the thinking mind to the big picture, the big question of what is life about, how should life be, and so on, the thinking mind really can't do anything else but do what it always does, which is to apply itself. And it applies itself to this question via its categories. So it has all these categories. Categories equal rules. And it's all the same thing: agendas, rules, categories, purposes, goals, all the same thing, all projections of thought. So what the mind does, it tries to solve the big problem by doing what it always does, which is by rules, by little formulae, by saying this, which is petty. It's petty because it'll never lead us out of thought's domain. Thought's domain is necessarily petty, and it's necessarily petty because the only way thought can work is by focusing the spotlight of the attention on what happens to be on the foreground and turning a blind eye to everything else, which makes the foreground swim into high resolution. It makes it seem real. So in order for the figure to seem real, we have to ignore the ground from which that figure is being distinguished. Unless that act as distinguishing takes place, there is no figure, there is only the ground. And the ground is not going to promote a figure of its own accord. We have to do that by exercising what is essentially blindness. We blind ourselves to the bigger picture and we focus on the smaller picture. Then the smaller picture seems real. It seems like the only picture there is. We're talking about the rational mind here. And then when the little picture seems like the only world it is, we step into that world. We can't help stepping into that world because as soon as we think it's the only world there is, obviously we're in it already. And then we're trapped in this petty construct of thought as easily as that, as quickly as that. So we have a device, we have a gimmick, and we give over our power to that device, to that gimmick, and then we become a victim of the device, a victim of the gimmick. Then we become hoisted by our own petard. And this is precisely what happens in everyday life. Every time we buy into the thinking mind as being an essential arbitrator between us and the world, every time we say, well, I can't do this alone, I need you, thinking mind, to come and filter it out for me and tell me what's right and what isn't right, or what's wrong, what's real and what isn't real. So in a nutshell, what we're doing is we're saying, coming back to the field of psychology, the field of therapy, we're saying if there is an upset to our mental health, the thinking mind can help us, will help us, and here's how. Here's what we're going to do, here's what you're going to do, here's what it says on the piece of paper, here's the protocol, etc., because we only ever talk in terms of the thinking mind, and the thinking mind is always trying to solve problems. So here's another problem, and the thinking mind tries to solve it. And yet this is dysfunctional because thought can only strip us of that expansiveness. So we're in this big field, we're in Rumi's field where there's no right and wrong, and it's a big expansive field, but the mind can't operate there. the mind has to ignore Rumy's field, build the walls around us, and then it creates a kind of cubicle. Then when it has us in the cubicle, and we don't see the bigger world that we are part of, which doesn't have right and wrong in it, but only the thought-created world, which is entirely made up of right and wrong, or rules, then we actually are unwell as a result of this. So no further refinement or development of the thinking process is going to extricate us from the hole that we have fallen in by allowing thought to make us petty. So we might as well say to thought, okay, thought, I've become very petty. Please help me. Show me a way out of this maze, this swamp. And thought will be only too happy to step in there grandly, because thought always likes to be useful. It always likes to be the center of attention. It always likes to be the one in control. And it's saying, yes, 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 I've got this one. I've got it figured out. Here's what you have to do. So the very, very simple thing that we have to understand is all of this, to understand that thought is only ever selling itself, and itself is not life. It's not reality. It's not anything. It's a private game. So the private game, which is thought, is always selling itself, and the more claustrophobic and painful it gets to be playing that private game, the more urgently thought will recommend its solutions to us. And that's just how things are. That's what life is like. We all know that from our own experience. But what we have to watch out for is going into a situation where people who supposedly know the answers, which is suspect right from the beginning when it's anything psychological that we're talking about, give us advice on the basis of the thinking process, advice on the basis of thought. That obviously isn't going to work at all. Okay, thanks for watching.